In this session, we're going to hear from 3 speakers on the importance of driving quality and skills within the energy efficiency industry to help us, Scotland, to transition to net zero. We've got my colleague, Kelly Nugent. I'm sure many of you know Kelly, my colleague in Scotland Excel, who is developing our energy efficiency replacement contract framework at this point in time. We're also glad to have along today colleagues Ian Cuthbert from the Scottish Government. He works in the Energy Efficient Scotland Delivery Unit. Pleased to have Ian along. And alongside Ian and Kelly, we've also got John Rennick. He's the Sector Manager for Construction in the Energy Skills Partnership. And there's a vast wealth of knowledge between those 3 speakers in terms of energy efficiency, and we're going to hear from them in a few minutes. So at this point, I would just like to hand over to our 3 presenters. Kelly is going to kick off with the presentation, so if I could just hand over to Kelly first of all.
Hi everybody, and thanks for joining the session today. I'm Kelly Nugent, the Senior Procurement Specialist at Scotland Excel, managing the Energy Efficiency Contractors framework, and I'm delighted to be hosting this session along with Ian Cuthbert and John Rennick. As Billy had mentioned, this session is really to discuss driving skills and quality within the energy efficiency sector and how important that is to help Scotland transition to net zero. So to kick off the session, I'd like to give you a short introduction to the Energy Efficiency Contractors Renewal Framework and discuss how this will actually support the objective. Next slide, please. So the anticipated start date of the renewal framework will be the 1st of November 2021, so this year. The renewal framework's been enhanced to provide our members with an efficient and effective method for upgrading their housing stock, with the ability to provide full house retrofitting and individual energy efficiency measures. The lotting structure covers a wide range of energy efficiency measures, which include professional services, such as retrofit coordinators, architectural services, as well as your building fabric measures, heating, ventilation and renewables. Next slide, please. So for the past year, I've had significant amount of stakeholder engagement within the energy efficiency market to help inform the development of the renewal framework. And some of the core discussions that we've had relates to quality and skills within the sector. To ensure that the renewal framework continues to meet our members' needs and delivers against the Scottish Government's key policy objectives, some of the key strategic procurement objectives that have been put in place is to provide our members with access to a variety of skilled contractors that can deliver quality energy efficiency measures within the sector and look at ways in how we continuously improve that over the lifetime of the framework. And another key objective for us is to embed a robust contract management working group, and that's to look at throughout the lifetime of the framework, how do we measure skills and quality of works, how do we work together more collaboratively, reviewing policy guidance and industry innovation, and how do we bring everybody together to achieve these core objectives. Next slide. So all of the research and stakeholder engagement that's happened in the past year has shown me that to help Scotland transition to net zero, we must recognise that procurement is a vehicle that can drive and embed quality and skills within the energy sector. And I believe that Scotland Excel is the people who can do that for you. And in order to do that, we need to ensure that the collaboration across the sector is at the heart of everything that we do. And again, with the establishing of the working group, with the renewal framework going live, with the key enhancements that we've put in place, together with the massive stakeholder engagement that's taken place, I believe that Scotland Excel can support that transition and look and embed key quality and skills within the industry. As I said, it was only a short introduction to the framework, so I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Ian Cuthbert, who will provide an overview on the skills consultation and the heat and building strategy, which will be a core deliverable within the sector.
All right, thank you, Kelly. I'm Ian Cuthbert, and just as way of introductions, I work in the Energy and Climate Change Directorate at the Scottish Government, and I'm responsible for supply chain standards, skills, and I guess quality assurance more generally. I just want to thank Kelly and Billy for introductions, and Scotland Excel for letting me take part today. So I've got quite a few things I want to cover. I mean, I suppose the key purpose here is to give you an overview of our proposals within our skills consultation, and it's worth mentioning that this consultation is now closed at the end of April, so hopefully some of you may have seen that, and hopefully some of you may have responded to that. Regardless, I'll go through some of the key proposals and hopefully answer any questions you may have as well. If we just go into the second slide now. Okay, so this is what I plan to cover today. So I want to give you a very brief overview about our draft heat and building strategy. And there's other announcements as well. I'll give you an overview of the background that's kind of led us here. I think it's important as well to cover the retrofit standards, because I know there's a lot of interest in this area at the moment. And my colleague John Rennick from the Energy Skills Partnership, he'll cover more details about the installer requirements, and then it will come back to me, and then I'll talk about requirements for other roles within the standards as well. I'll also cover a little bit about heat networks, because that was something that was included in the consultation. And then finally, I'll give you some key dates, and we can also answer the questions you may have. Okay, if we just go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so we'll just start with our announcements. So in terms of my work, in terms of improving the energy efficiency of buildings, there was essentially 3 key announcements which all came out at the same time. So so the first is the draft heat and building strategy. The one in the middle is the skills consultation. That's what I'm going to cover in detail. The third one is the Low Carbon Infrastructure Transition Programme, LCITP. So that was a call for evidence seeking input on actions to modify or enhance support mechanisms provided through the programme. I'm not going to cover that part. It's a bit more niche, but I think what I'll do is I'll arrange for the Scotland Excel to share the links to these documents as well, so you can have a look at them in more detail. So whilst the focus is on the skills consultation, it'd be useful to just give you an overview of our draft heat and building strategy as well. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to cover this in detail, but just give you a sort of overview. So what is the heat and building strategy? So it's essentially an update to our 2018 Energy Efficient Scotland route map and 2015 heat policy statement. So it's kind of combined the two, and it sets out how we will achieve net zero emission in Scotland buildings by 2045. It covers not just the reduction in heat demand, but through decarbonising heat, but also covers energy efficiency as well. So, for example, by 2030, over 1 million homes and around 50,000 non-domestic buildings will need to change their heating. So that's the scale of the challenge, and I think we're probably all aware of how significant that is. Within the heat and building strategy, there's around I think there's 100+ actions within that, covered across a number of chapters. But I think the key messages here is that our statutory targets are both very demanding, and it requires a really high pace of change. And the pace and scale of the trajectory we must take to meet our net zero ambitions, it's unprecedented, and this is going to touch upon the lives of almost everyone in Scotland. So it's a real big deal. And of course, the people of Scotland must be central to this transition, not just making it happen, but obviously in terms of supply chain, economic development, all that sort of stuff. So so we want to ensure that no one's left behind with this, and we want to ensure there's a just transition. But this can only be achieved if there's a robust supply chain in place. And obviously that supply chain needs to have the capacity and capability to deliver on our vision, you know, to improve the well-being of people living in Scotland and to create sustainable and inclusive growth. And it might interest you to know that we estimate that there's around about 13,000 people employed in the energy efficiency low carbon sector in Scotland, and they've got an annual turnover about 2.4 billion. So that's something that we want to increase a lot more, and I think we're already looking at increasing that from 13,000 to around 24,000 people. One important aspect of the heat and building strategy relevant to this presentation is that there's a question about seeking views on trust mark. So we're looking at quality marks for energy efficiency. So one of the things we're exploring is the UK government endorsed trust mark scheme. So based on the heat and building strategy, we'll be capturing views on that, and we hope to announce perhaps later this summer about whether or not we're going to go with Trustmark. So anyway, that's just a very quick whistle stop tour. So just on to the skills consultation now. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is just some background. So Scottish ministers agreed to convene a short life working group. So this was back in 2018, and that was to focus on quality skills, supply chain and consumer protection. Now the group, well, you can see the members of the group on this slide, which included representatives from across industry, consumer organisations, enterprise and skills agencies, and you'll also see Scotland Excel. We're also a key member of that group as well. So what this group did was it created a report with 19 recommendations, and this report was published in March 2019. And these 19 recommendations were for ministers in terms of recommendations for developing quality assurance for the Energy Efficient Scotland programme, including heat, and some of those related to skills as well. So if you just go into the next slide, please. Thank you. So of particular relevance to this presentation are these recommendations. So the first was to you know, to develop the quality assurance criteria and establish what the mandatory requirements are for suppliers wishing to participate in Energy Efficient Scotland. There was also a recommendation about a new designer role. So that whole building approach could be taken, because there was concerns that, you know, without a designer, that maybe the wrong measures are put on homes, you know. And then perhaps the more significant one was a recommendation that skills and competencies must be at the heart of Energy Efficient Scotland, and that a skills and qualifications matrix should be developed. In addition to this, I mean, in terms of the group, there was also a feeling that the current skills landscape for energy efficiency could be a bit fragmented, open to interpretation, and quite often it's provided by non-accredited training providers as well. So there was a real desire to kind of help address this, but, you know, ultimately we want to professionalise the sector and create career pathways for young people as well, and obviously that's going to help with the whole shift in terms of the capacity. So following the publication of this report, we commissioned the Energy Skills Partnership to progress some of these recommendations, particularly number 7, and the output of Energy Skills Partnership work has helped lead to the skills consultation. Now, John at Energy Skills Partnership, he'll cover the installer skill requirement shortly, but I just want to cover the high level proposals from the consultation. So if you go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So So I guess there's two key things here. One is a proposal in the consultation is that the installer skills matrix developed by industry and the sector skills bodies led by Energy Skills Partnership, that they are adopted fully into the BSI retrofit standards and also the MCS standards for renewables, because this will reflect Scotland's skill needs. And then secondly, we want to work with stakeholders and skills agencies to develop qualifications in Scotland, either if they don't exist or they're for new roles coming into the standards as well. So a good example of that is the retrofit coordinator role as well. So yeah, we want to adopt these standards, the BSI standards, because one, they're the main standards for retrofit work in the UK, and secondly, our response to our 2019 Energy Efficient Scotland consultation, the feedback we got from that was that any work carried out, work should be done in accordance to those standards, and that we shouldn't have separate standards for Scotland and separate for England. So there was a strong feeling about a kind of pan GB wide standards. Now, I'm conscious that some of you might not be aware of these standards, so I'm going to cover these now. So just go on to the next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So very briefly, so in June 2019, BSI, which is the British Standards Institution, so they published a new retrofit standard for energy efficiency known as the Publicly Available Specification, or PAS 2035. So this standard covers the entire energy efficiency retrofit process in homes, from the initial assessment and design to installation and evaluation, and it incorporates the updated PAS 2030 installer standards as well. So together, they're known as PAS 2035 / PAS 2030 2019 edition. Now, as many of you are probably aware, so PAS 2035, PAS 2030 are mandatory for ECO come 1st of July. So I've liaised with my colleagues in our ABS teams about this. So just as a sort of update on where we're at with this. So UCAS is the body that approves the certification bodies, and it's the certification bodies who then approve the installers, right? So UCAS and the certification bodies, they've confirmed to us that for non-eco finance work, PAS 2030 installers can continue to deliver measures to the 2017 standards until the end of October. Also, BEIS has confirmed that an extension to the deadline for completion of measures delivered to the old standards is not feasible for eco-financed work. So for PAS 2030 2017, it's not feasible for eco-finance work, but it is for non-eco-finance work, if that makes sense. And also for Scottish Government funded work that was started in 2020-21, which in many cases had to be delayed, obviously, because of COVID. These can continue to the 2017 PAS 2030. But I understand that councils may need to discuss how this is funded with our ABS team, and this extension will help ensure that planned 2020-21 work be completed in line with householder expectations about the costs of works. So e.g. where a quote was obtained for a loan, etc. It's also worth mentioning that there's an ongoing dialogue between ourselves, BSI, and the certification bodies and Trustmark about how the new standards can be successfully implemented and reflect stakeholder feedback in Scotland. So this includes the development of amended versions of PAS 2035, PAS 2030, to ensure they're fit for purpose in Scotland. And BSI plans to consult on these during the summer. So basically, they're going to be consulting on this. We've fed back all the feedback from Scotland so far. There'll be a consultation, and then there'll be a amendments made to PAS 2035, PAS 2030 come 1st of September. So I guess any concerns people might have about the standards, now is the time to respond to that consultation and give feedback. And I'll be arranging, liaising with my colleagues in ABS teams to help share that consultation as well. Also, I should mention non-domestic as well. So BSI, I think I've just recently developed standards for non-domestic buildings. So that's called PAS 2038. But there's still a lot to sort of get our head around in terms of how we implement that, etc. But the standards do exist. And obviously for renewables, we're still going with MCS as well. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So just a brief summary in terms of how the standards work. So I'm using this sort of diagram here to show you the sort of relationship. So the key role is the retrofit coordinator, and it's their role to protect both the client's interest and the public interest. And the retrofit coordinator is responsible for overseeing the project from inception to completion. So they'll also do a medium-term plan, like a report. They also have to ensure compliance with the standards, and they'll literally, coordinate the work across assessor, designer, installer, evaluator as well. A critical element of the standards is the risk assessment, which is carried out by a retrofit coordinator, because that then dictates the level of competency that the other roles have. So low risk is called path A, and then you've got path B, medium, and path C, high. So if it was higher risk path C, then the requirements, for example, on a designer would be quite high. So it'd be quite likely you need an architect to be involved with this. Obviously, the retrofit assessor, they carry out the assessment, they capture the data, and they pass on to the retrofit coordinator. The designer, they prepare a package of information that determines the unique combination of energy efficiency systems and products, and the interrelationship between the two as well. And they also obviously have to consider what the outcomes are for the project as well. Installer carries out the work in accordance with PAS 2030, and the evaluator is a person qualified to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of retrofit project and provide feedback to the client and or the project team. So the evaluator, it's worth mentioning that in practice, I think it's highly likely that the retrofit coordinator, assessor, and evaluator will probably be the same person or the same company. There's also retrofit advice that you will see here, but what's interesting is the standards are being changed, so that's no longer a role within its own right. So advice is going to be spread through all the other roles. So the assessor will have a role for advice, retrofit coordinator, etc. So it's going to be integrated as opposed to a role in itself. And I think there's quite a lot of sense for doing that. You just go to the next slide. I think this is my last one before John. Yeah, so if you're interested about the risk pathways and the risk assessment, this is an example within the standards about how it's calculated. So the key sort of metrics for this is, the number of dwellings to be improved, the average number of improvement measures per dwelling, the inherent technical risk of the highest risk measure, the risk of combining measures as well, and the construction and built form of buildings. So the risk identified then informs the pathway required for the project, which, as I mentioned, has implications on the competency for the roles. So, for example, as I said, the example given of the designer, for example. So anyway, I hope this section helps you understand the standards now. So I think we can now go into the detail of the skills proposals, starting with the installer skills matrix. So I'm going to hand over to John Rennick from Energy Skills Partnership to give you an overview. And then what we'll do is we'll then come back to me and I'll talk about the skill requirements for the non-installer roles as well. Over to you, John.
Thank you, Ian. And I'm just going to keep my video off if you don't mind, because it just kicked me out earlier. So just to minimise any precautions, I'll keep this off and put it on just for the Q&A if it's helpful. So good afternoon, everyone. Before I start, I'd like to thank Scotland Excel for pulling this webinar together to discuss the skills matrix for energy efficiency and microgeneration systems. As mentioned, I'm the sector manager for construction at ESP. If I don't get the chance to answer everyone's questions, please feel free to contact me at any time. My contact details will be on the last slide. Next slide, please. So I'll give you a quick overview of ESP. ESP is a collaboration of all Scottish colleges. It was established in 2011 to lead on construction, engineering and energy to maximise Scotland's economic development and job creation opportunities. Our role is to broaden existing relationships, partnerships, and to promote increased collaboration. This may be regionally or nationally depending on the future skills needed. Our sector managers have a mix of industry and academic experience, providing the expertise required to drive this sector forward. Next slide, please. This is a location map, basically details all 24 colleges, and it splits into regions as well. So if you are looking to work in partnership with a local college, you can just locate your closest college to you for future reference. Next slide, please. As Ian mentioned, the Scottish Government Short Life Working Group created a set of 19 recommendations. Recommendation 7 was to identify existing qualifications for the energy efficiency and microgeneration sector. Our key objectives for this group was to map existing accredited energy qualifications in Scotland, identify skills gaps, develop a set of minimum skills competencies, and develop an interactive map. Next slide, please. Energy Efficient Scotland's Quality and Skills Working Group was then established in January 2019 in partnership with Scottish Government, Energy Savings Trust and ESP. The membership consisted of sector skills bodies for construction, heating, electrical and construction trade bodies, Scottish colleges, skills agencies and other stakeholders. The group outlaid their positivity around the development of this skills matrix. It was clear from the outset this matrix was going to identify a set of recommended minimum accredited qualifications that would enhance the quality and provision of the low carbon heat and energy efficiency sector. Manufacturer training was not part of this framework but has been recognised as important, specifically around advances in materials and their applications. Now I'm going to give you some examples. Next slide, please. This is the minimum recommendation skills qualification for the air source and ground source heat pump sector. There are 3 optional career paths for new entrants on the right hand side. And traditionally this is recognised as an apprenticeship pathway in Scotland. These pathways are a mix of training, assessment and job experience while being employed, providing them with the knowledge and skills specific to their sector. The 3 optional career paths are domestic plumbing and heating route, or install, commission and maintain refrigeration systems, or install, commission and maintain air conditioning systems route. Tradespeople that have come through one of these recognised routes and want to install air source ground source heat pumps will have to be upskilled in a short 3-day course that consists of training and assessment. They must undertake a National Occupational Standards NOS MAP qualification. That's the side on the left hand side here. In this case, this is install and commission fuel systems emerging technologies and water bylaws regulations if required, and domestic vented and unvented hot water storage if required as well. And finally, anyone working on pre-1919 buildings, that individual will have to be upskilled on a 2 to 3 day course, a short day course in energy efficiency measures for older or traditional buildings to build up their knowledge in the traditional vulnerable buildings prior to 1919. Now, a qualified plumber, refrigeration or air conditioning engineer can be upskilled at any point in their career. These are classed as bolt-on qualifications and can be obtained from any training provider across Scotland. In fact, major investment has been put into Scotland's colleges at the moment to ensure training facilities are available with the latest technologies and to help drive net zero targets by 2045. Scottish Government is also focused on the green job recovery. Substantial funding is in place to support tradespeople who are upskilled at the moment. I'll cover more details on funding in a few slides. Now you may have tradespeople that have come from overseas or from across borders that have other qualifications that are not mapped against the skills matrix. This is okay, as the skills matrix is a recommendation only, and does accept the term "or relevant." If this situation occurs, this is when RPL comes into play. RPL stands for Recognition of Prior Learning and is a method of assessment leading to the award of credit. RPL is acceptable for accrediting a unit or a whole qualification. Evidence of learning must be valid and reliable, and training providers are very familiar with this method and will assess each individual case by case if this situation arises. Next slide, please. Now, I'm not going to go into detail on this example, but as you can see, the structure is very similar. Optional pathways with a bolt-on upskilling qualification and pre-1919 for those working on pre-1919 buildings. The Skills Competency Framework is a live document that may be subject to change as qualifications become lapsed or updated, or even if technologies are amended. Next slide, please. This is the installation matrix recommendations set by the Quality and Skills Working Group back in early 2020. This is the current framework. The one published on the skills consultation, although this is a good example of a live framework, as this has just been updated. Same again, the optional career pathways are outlined on the right-hand side that lead on to the short bolt-on courses for anyone working on pre-1919 or older traditional buildings. With these career pathways, new entrants can also pick up their specialist route that's more suitable to their sector. Next slide. This is the updated installation skills matrix for Scottish Government. Same again, career pathways on the right-hand side, leading on to pre-1919 for those working on older traditional buildings. The only major difference with this is that the specialist routes have been updated in line with the enhancement in technologies and industry requirements. We have a small number of training centres in Scotland going through approvals as we speak, who will offer these qualifications, and we're expecting more to follow in the near future. We are aware that many installation employees have experience in this sector but may not hold a current qualification. This is known as an experienced worker route and is very common in this sector. An installation working group has been set up to address this and identify suitable models that will help experienced workers gain a relevant and recognised qualification. Industry will be fully involved in this process, and if anyone here would like to participate in this development, please contact me. Next slide, please. Timing is good if you're considering expanding into the low carbon heat and energy efficiency sector in Scotland. Scottish Government has positioned substantial funding that will support the supply chain to transition into this sector. Briefly, I'm going to cover 3 funding streams designed to help small, medium or large companies. First one is the Flexible Workforce Development Fund. This is available to upskill existing workforce to retain jobs and support employers as they pivot and adapt to a new and very different working environment as a result of COVID-19. Phase 1, up to £15,000 is available for levy-paying employers. A total of £13 million is available for Scotland. And Phase 2, £4 million for supply chain for small, medium enterprises up to £5,000 each. If you're interested in accessing any of this funding, please make contact with your local college for further information. Next slide, please. Scottish Government has also funding to support industry to be upskilled in air source and ground source heat pumps. This is only available to heating, plumbing, refrigeration, ventilation or air conditioning engineers, as they're required to have the prior knowledge and skills that will allow them to transition into the sector. An example that prior knowledge would be of an SVQ 3 or equivalent. It's another great opportunity for businesses that meet the eligibility to transition into this area where there is a clear Scottish Government demand. Next slide, please. It's another Scottish Government fund, the National Transition Training Fund for Energy Efficiency, available from March to July 2021. This provides 100% funding to support people who have lost their jobs or who are at risk of redundancy as a result of COVID-19. This funding is aimed at people aged 25 and over to allow the development of skills that will assist them to transition into roles with a better potential for future growth and job retention. Funding is only available to certain groupings. It's important to highlight this as in below, Group A, B, C and D. For example, Group A, plumbing and heating, ventilation and air conditioning engineers must hold appropriate industry qualifications, VQ3 or equivalent, and so on. There's different routes to only get access to this. Next slide, please. This is a map detailing the National Transition Training Fund courses and delivery partners across Scotland's colleges. If you or you know someone that is eligible to access this funding that has been affected by COVID-19, please contact any of the colleges listed or pass on these slides. Colleges are working collaboratively and will be launching a joined up marketing campaign and website after August, because there'll be an additional millions going to this sector to help actually a industry affected by COVID-19. And final slide. And my contact details are on this slide, as I said earlier, and thank you for your time. Back to you yourself, Kelly or Ian.
Thanks, John. Yeah, it's back to me. Okay, can we just go forward slide? Okay, thank you very much. Right, so I'll try and whiz through. I'm just conscious of time, and I just need to make sure that we've got adequate time for questions as well. So, so this is looking at the competency requirements for other roles. So the retrofit coordinator, this requires a level 5 diploma in retrofit coordination and risk management. Now, we understand this qualification is currently only available from a training provider in England, but rest assured we are looking to develop this further in Scotland, and we're having discussions with Skills Development Scotland and other stakeholders to address this. So this is something that we're focusing quite heavily on. The retrofit assessor, it depends on the pathways, but essentially for risk A, it's a retrofit coordinator or domestic energy assessor, and for risk grades B and C, where older traditional buildings are involved, then Scottish Level 3 award in energy efficiency measures for older and traditional buildings is required. If we just go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so the designer role. So for low risk, i.e. risk grade A, the designer can be a retrofit coordinator or a chartered architectural technologist. But in addition to this, they also must be approved by the manufacturer of that system, gas safe registered, or for all heating holds competent person's registration if applicable, although given our requirement for decarbonisation, I think that's probably less applicable, and they need to be MCS certified for renewables as well. For risk grade B, a retrofit coordinator, a chartered architectural technologist, an architect registered by the ARB would also be sufficient, as would a member of the Chartered Institute of Building or a chartered building surveyor. And then for risk C, essentially it's the same as B, but with additional professional requirements for traditionally constructed buildings, e.g. RIS membership. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the retrofit evaluator, so this is essentially the retrofit coordinate. So essentially the retrofit coordinator can carry this out, but they must hold the level 3 award for older and traditional buildings. But if the monitoring is deemed more advanced, then a separate retrofit coordinator will be required. So that's if it's like higher grade risk. Next slide, please. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but for heat networks, as part of the consultation, we've been doing a lot of work in this area. So we're looking at developing training provision on project management of heat networks, also heat network design through professional courses, installation and optimization of heat networks, and technical operation and maintenance. So we're already working with some colleges and universities on this, and we hope to develop this further. So obviously for those of you with an interest in heat networks, watch this space. Okay, and then just to my last slide, key dates. Okay, so I've just tried to summarize some of these. So obviously the consultation closed on the 30th of April, so I've mentioned that already. But in the summer, we plan to integrate the skills matrix, as John presented, within the PAS 2030 installer standards, but also MCS as well. And we're already engaging with them about this. And then imminently, there's going to be a consultation on the amendments to the PAS 2035, PAS 2030 standards. And then I'd say about July, August time, that's when we'll publish our analysis from our skills consultation. And then round about 1st September, that's when the new amended PAS 2035, PAS 2030 standards come into force. And then the 30th of October, that's what I mentioned previously, where PAS 2030 installers can continue to deliver non-eco measures to the 2017 standards up until the end of that month. But just finally, before we come to questions, I mean, I think I'm conscious that this is quite a lot to cover in such a short space of time, but the key messages from me is that the standards, the PAS 2035, PAS 2030, they've already been confirmed for our programs. So, you know, that we've already mentioned that in our skills consultation. We expect skills to be incorporated into these standards, and we hope to announce the quality mark this summer, because I'm keen that, you know, we send a clear message to the market to help suppliers prepare to take part in our programs, because conscious that they need time to get approved. So I want to give them as much notice as possible for that. The obvious exception, of course, is eco, but, you know, I've mentioned that earlier, that's a UK-wide thing. And also, you know, we're on a steep learning curve for this, you know, and the standards and skills shouldn't be considered final by any means. So this is constant work in progress for us. And, you know, we're keen to engage with local authorities, industry and other stakeholders on this as well. So, so I'll finish on that point, and really keen for any questions or comments that you could send through. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, John. That was really informative and interesting. And I think, Ian, you mentioned there you had such a lot to try and a lot of information to give us there. You gave it as comprehensively as you could. I'm thankful for your last slide. Actually, there are a couple of questions that was prompting my own mind, but you've answered them in your last slide there, which is really helpful. I also see that we've got a few questions on the chat, but what I would like to do just before going to them, if I could, is to see if we have any hands, people who want to actually ask the question verbally to either Kelly, Ian or John. And I'll try and make sure I can see my hands, because I would also ask Laura, if you're there. I know in a previous session I missed some hands, so if I'm missing any hands, if you could prompt me, that'd be helpful, please.
I can't see any hands up, Billy. I think it's just your hand that's up.
All right.
If you've got a question.
I did have, actually, Ian did answer it in his last slide. It was obviously the further time of the consultation, and so I'm clear about that. Thank you for that, Ian. So I'll go back to the first question that I think came up on the chat, if I can do that first of all. And I think it was from a Nicola Gooch, who's a Community Benefits Officer, if I picked that up correctly. And she, I think, was prompting the question towards yourself, Ian. And I guess you mentioned some working groups there, and I think Nicola was keen to understand where those working groups develop from, and more importantly, I guess, is there room for further members in those working groups? Yeah,
so that's a very good question. So when I was talking there's maybe a number of different groups. So there was the quality group I mentioned at the start, and that's the thing that's triggered a lot of the work on skills. So then that led to, I suppose if you could imagine, a subgroup to develop skills that John was leading on. So that first group that developed the 19 recommendations, in which Scotland Excel was part of, that's pretty much been disbanded, although we could bring it back potentially. The skills group, that had a very distinct remit for developing a skills matrix. So John and I have already had discussions about, reconvening it, to develop skills further, but perhaps broadening the remit as well, maybe to include standards as well. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, Scotland Excel was involved with that, wasn't it?
No, not in the Quality and Skills Working Group, but
No.
Going forward, we'll make sure they're involved in any process.
Okay, so I think maybe not actively involved, but definitely involved, so one-to-one basis in that. So we're looking at that, but I think the fundamental thing here, we're at a bit of a critical point, because for me, we're now on the cusp of confirming the quality mark, the standards, and the skills, right? The next bit for me is the implementation and delivery of that, and that's going to be a really big challenge. So I would like to develop a group to help us develop that. Obviously we've got a new administration in at the moment, with Scottish ministers. There's been changes, as you're probably aware. So we need to get ministerial approval for that. But I think we will need some kind of body for that. And I think we would, as part of that, naturally, we want to include Scotland Excel and local authorities within that. There's some practicalities to consider in terms of, the numbers and stuff like that, but the principles are there. So, in a sense, I think it's quite good timing, Billy, that we could,
Absolutely.
consider this.
No, absolutely, and thank you for that, and I think that answers your question there, Nicola. I see,
Yeah.
Kelly, you have your hand up. Do you want to follow on from that narrative that Ian has just given us there, yeah?
Yes, please. It's just over and above that. So one of the strategic procurement objectives we've got under the framework is we will also be looking to develop a working group which will consist of Scottish Government, suppliers within the market, local authorities and their members. And that will be to actually review the framework lifetime to ensure that it's still meeting needs, that we're clear on what the policy objectives are, and that, well, it's come back to what I'm saying, Scotland Excel can be a vehicle for driving skills and quality in the market, and the way to actually do that is by establishing a working group where we collaboratively work together to deliver outcomes, and where Scotland Excel can, we can support that transition piece that can be quite difficult with the Scottish Government and the Energy Skills Partnership. So we've already started doing a huge piece of that work where we're understanding gaps within the market, feeding it back in, and it's actually helping the colleges understand where they need to actually baseline what some of those colleges courses should actually look like and which areas they should be based in. So Nicola, more than happy for you to be involved in that working group session as well. It won't go live until the framework's live, but I'll take a note of your name for when I'm starting to go out to look for people to be part of that.
Thank you for adding to that, Kelly. That's really helpful as well. I see we've probably got a number of questions here. I think I'm probably going to struggle to get through them all, folks. So I'll come back to, I see Annabelle's got a question there, but I think to give I think it's possibly John's area, this one here. We've got a question. Obviously, there's the huge, the colossal amount that's spent in the public sector, which is construction related. John, some £14 billion, our colleague Steve Brannigan has pointed out here. I guess the question is, or the question clearly is, how do all of our colleagues, our procurement colleagues, how do we promote and encourage and push for those skills to support those standards? What advice would you give for that?
Well, it's quite a tricky one, because really where I see the opportunities, I always say there's not enough tradespeople in the sector. So what I would say is I would recommend apprentices as a ground route. The more apprentices that are taken on by regional councils or supply chain really helps drive the sector, and that will really help drive net zero targets as well. And the reason I'm going to outlay that is because the professional tradespeople are the ones that will be the installers for the future. So what a key recommendation by myself, I'm always at many meetings where somebody will say there's not enough tradespeople to install or to deliver. I totally agree with that, but we need to employ. So that's my key message here is employ, take new starters on, and help by actually introducing young learners into these trades, what will help drive net zero targets.
Thank you, John. Hopefully that answers your question, Steve, but I think that's very clear from John. I'll go back to the question from Annabelle. I think it's maybe directed towards yourself, Ian. And it's obviously something that many people have in their heads. Is the Scottish Government clear about the sort of funding clarity for who will pay for energy efficiency in private homes to get to net zero? Is there a clear path for that, Ian?
Yeah, well, that's the key question, and that's something that I believe we're exploring in our heating building strategy. I think there's a number of options being looked at. So, you know, from providing financial incentives, perhaps leveraging in private finance as well. So, I don't know, maybe green mortgages is one example. And then, of course, we've got the regulations as well. So they are sort of carrots and sticks, I suppose, in terms of doing that. But, you know, we're still some way off in terms of clarifying what that is. So if I recall, the draft heating building strategy, the consultation, which we're analysing at the moment, will help provide insights into that. But clearly, that's a massive area. I mean, that's, you know, really big, and it kind of relates to my point earlier about the 1 million homes by 2030. You know, that's a key part of that. So I'm guessing that, you know, I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but hopefully it goes somewhere towards it.
No, it's helpful. It's helpful. Thank you, Ian. I'm conscious, folks, we've got another couple of minutes or so. So I've got a number of questions here. I think the first one, it may be yourself, Kelly, or Ian, and it's around the energy performance certificate was referenced earlier. That is going to be a key metric, and I think the direct question is here: will that align with the current ISH 2 outcomes? I'm not sure if you can see that in the chat there. There's further narrative there, Ian or Kelly.
Yeah, well, so okay, so I'm pretty sure in the heating building strategy, and certainly the Energy Efficient Scotland route map, there was a big diagram that showed you the timescales, you know, with ISH in the private sector and all this stuff. And obviously, the targets for ISH have been, you know, more pressing, you know, than other areas. So my understanding is that although the timescales might change, the end point, you know, is essentially the same. You know, although I think for ISH, is it not? They're looking at band maybe up as high as band B now. I'm not sure. So maybe for ISH it's maybe slightly higher. But there is timescales tracked for that. So for the private sector, that's band C. So the details on that are, you know, they're all in our heat and building strategy. There's an actual route map diagram you can see, which I can, you know, happy to share. But yeah, it's in there definitely.
There's also a team within Scottish Government that's currently looking at energy performance certificates to look at actually reviewing the process that sits behind that, which I imagine aligns with the new heat and building strategy and the new target dates for ISH 2. So there is already discussions going on regarding EPCs, because I guess everybody is more than aware of some of the pitfalls with that measure. So that there is work happening, and where possible we will be input into that.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Kelly. I think, folks, I'm sorry, but that's us probably came to the end of our time. We've went a little bit over, but we've got a little bit more time between our next session. It probably just then leaves me again to thank our speakers. It was so informative. Obviously, the amount of time and effort they put in to try and give us such a comprehensive picture is really appreciated, and I'm sure it will be appreciated by the full audience. So thank you very much again, folks.
Thanks for having us. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.